The first time I heard of a lockdown, I knew that there would be tremendous harms, especially the poor, especially children, and I thought it was irresponsible. To me, it was essentially a policy aimed at protecting the laptop class, the set of people who had the ability.
The laptop class.
Right, they weren't going to lose their jobs. They had a nice house. They could live. They could stay separated. But for the rest of society and for vast swaths of especially children, it was going to be deeply harmful. As soon as I heard about them, I realized, they said 2 weeks. I realized it was not possible in 2 weeks. Because the lockdowns themselves sent a signal to the entire population of the world that you must be scared.
Yeah.
And that fear fed on itself. It made it impossible to reopen. It was very clear. It was to me almost immediately that it wasn't based on a real acknowledgement of the scientific evidence about who was at highest risk. It was older people who was highest risk from the disease. And it devalued the well-being of vast numbers of people who were not vulnerable to COVID, but were vulnerable to lockdown. The fact is that Sweden had the lowest all-cause excess mortality than all of the rest of the world. All of Europe, all of the Americas, everywhere, the lowest. So as far as protecting human life, Sweden did the best.
It was the most successful.
And did not lock down. I don't know what will happen with China. Right? It looks like it could be I hope not, but it could be, what if it's what if there's a second Cold War? And China has a huge investment they've made in biomedicine. They are the second leading country in the world in biomedicine, I think. They'd probably say the leading country in the world in biomedicine. Will we have a scientific world riven in two like we did during the Cold War? I think we should try our very hardest to avoid that, but that's a real possibility.
Welcome to the New World. Thorough conversations in times of change. My name is Adrian Verbrugge and my guest today is Jay Bhattacharya. Welcome, Jay. He's an emeritus professor of medicine, economics and health, research and policy at the Stanford University. And he's the co-author of the Great Barrington Declaration during COVID. And that's one of the reasons I'm talking to him right now. And he's currently the director of the National Institutes of Health of the United States of America. A very warm welcome, Jay. It's a great honor and pleasure having you here in our program, The New World, De Nieuwe Wereld.
Thank you, Adrian. So nice to be here.
Yeah, we're sitting here in the neighborhood of Rome, and our mutual friend, Christian... sorry? Christian Alting van Geusau made it possible that we could have this conversation. I'm very grateful to him. So for the public, first of all, maybe a short introduction of you, Jay. You are a professor at Stanford, and maybe you can tell us something about the way you were working and what happened in the beginning of the 20s.
So I was I have an MD and a PhD, a medical degree and a PhD in economics. And I had been a professor at Stanford for over 20 years in 2020 in the economics department in the School of Medicine, studying epidemiology, health policy, a whole host of topics, including infectious disease policy.
Yeah.
Then COVID happened. And I had reservations almost from the very beginning about the idea, first about the scientific ideas about the spread of the disease, and then also almost immediately, I think partly thanks to my economics training, on the idea that the lockdowns would be a effective way of addressing the pandemic for two reasons. One, in terms of how effective they were likely to be, but also in terms of the collateral harms that they were likely to have especially on the poor, on children. In October of 2020, two colleagues of mine, one from Harvard, Martin Kulldorff, and one from Harvard, Sunetra Gupta, the three of us wrote the Great Barrington Declaration calling for this. I remember this is October 2020, 5 months in, the lockdowns had already failed to control the disease that had been imposed worldwide in the spring of 2020. And it was very clear that in the fall and the winter, there's going to be more lockdowns.
Yeah.
So we wrote this declaration calling for no lockdowns, calling instead to protect vulnerable older people better, and letting children go to school, letting younger people who are much lower risk of dying from COVID or much higher risk of harm from the lockdowns, to let them have a more normal life.
Yeah, and the interesting thing was at the time, it also had become clear that the mortality rate wasn't as big as we first thought. When the pandemic started, so people were talking about 2 or 3%, but there was exaggeration, overestimation of this mortality rate. I think the famous article from Ioannidis was published in the summer.
So that I wrote that article with John. Yeah. So we were in the spring of 2020. I had this idea along with John and some other colleagues of mine at Stanford that in fact, as you said, the disease was less likely to be, it was less severe than was being reported in the press. The reason was that it was very clear the disease spread very easily, much more easily than people realized in the spring of early, in say February 2020. We ran a study asking how many people had already had COVID, looking at antibodies, which were a sure measure of at least been exposure to COVID. And we found in California, for every person that had been identified as a case, there were 50 people walking around that already had COVID and recovered. So the death rate from the disease was something like 2 out of 1,000, 3 out of 1,000.
Yes.
Rather than the 3 or 4%, 3 out of 100, 4 out of 100, that was being reported by the World Health Organization at the time.
Yeah. Now the strange thing is, at first when I heard about the disease, and I think it was the end of January, the beginning of February, and I followed some channels on YouTube, and in which we could see that the Chinese were having serious trouble with the disease. I started to think, well, of course it's coming to Europe. That's what my first idea. And what are we going to do? And my first initial reaction was, we cannot simply lock down and lock up all our youngsters. It was already clear that people who were had some underlying diseases were more harm. They had a greater risk of becoming sick, seriously sick. So I think it was a kind of a natural reaction. I think as a parent of the 3 kids, I thought we can do that. And the strange thing is, I began to feel ashamed the longer the disease was going around, and the longer we dealt with it as a society. I kind of feel ashamed. What are we doing? What kind of example are we giving in the way we're dealing with this disease? How was your initial reaction?
The first time I heard of a lockdown, I had the same exact reaction as you. I knew that there would be tremendous harms, especially the poor, especially children, and I thought it was irresponsible. To me, it was essentially a policy aimed at protecting the laptop class. The set of people who had the ability,
the laptop class,
right? They weren't going to lose their jobs. They had a nice house. They could live. They could stay separated. But for the rest of society and for vast swaths of especially children, it was going to be deeply harmful. I mean, there was a reporter that interviewed me in late March 2020, asking me about domestic violence and child abuse, and I told him that they would go up during the lockdowns because. For children, for instance, at least in the United States, the primary place where child abuse is caught is in schools. If you close schools down, more child abuse will continue to happen, but there'll be no one to intervene, right? Same thing with domestic violence. And the lockdowns themselves, as soon as I heard about them, I realized, they said 2 weeks. I realized it was not possible in 2 weeks, because the lockdowns themselves sent a signal to the entire population of the world that you must be scared.
Yeah.
And that fear fed on itself. It made it impossible to reopen. It was very clear. It was to me almost immediately that it wasn't based on a real acknowledgement of the scientific evidence about who was at highest risk. It was older people was highest risk from the disease. And it devalued the well-being of vast numbers of people who were not vulnerable to COVID, but were vulnerable to lockdowns.
Yeah, I think one of the tasks right now is to reflect on what had happened during those days. But in Europe, I can see not even a serious beginning of a reflection on what has happened. I think your appointment is, in a way, a symbol of hope. We can talk about that, but because what is at stake is the position of science, the relation of science to politics. I think this relation has been seriously damaged. It's messed up. There is like a politicization of science and some kind of scientification of politics, in which each loses its own identity, because in the end, all those measures that you are taking are political and moral measures. I mean, they're related to a worldview. How do we want to live? We have to consider several interests and values. But the funny thing is, it all disappeared at the time. Like there was nothing left. Then science is giving the definitive answer, and it's all about security, safety, but not really thinking about what we mean by those terms. The safety of whom, in what sense, the security of whom. So this is a crisis of science itself and politics itself, I think.
Adrian, there's so much in what you just said, and I think it's very, very insightful. Let me just, a few observations, just in recollecting what happened in 2020. If you watch the politicians in the West carefully, it was very clear that there is, let's say March, February 2020, that they were all extremely scared.
Yeah.
Like it's extremely fearful, not just about the disease, but that they would do something that in retrospect, where they would be accused of doing the wrong thing scientifically. And
Yeah,
so
we saw that in the Netherlands. Yeah.
And so what they would do is they would go find scientific gurus and say, look, and elevate them. You know, Tony Fauci probably is the best example of this worldwide. And then say, look, this person is saying this is the right thing to do. And so the politicians would use a few scientists, elevate them to the highest positions of authority, and say, well, we're just following the science. And the calculation, I think, maybe even it wasn't even conscious, was that if I do this, if I follow this few high scientists, then even if something goes wrong, I'm not to blame.
But we can understand that the politicians are scared. I think one of the virtues of a politician is that he has to be has to have a certain courage. But okay, I can imagine that the politician becomes scared. But how come that science is willing to legitimize something that has such huge impact on society? What about the consciousness of the conscience of science itself in such a situation?
I mean, the notion of science as knowledge that is so all-encompassing that it can direct the movements and correct actions of every individual on the face of the planet. That's a fallacy. Right? Science is extremely powerful because in its area, it's a way of discovering truth about the physical world. The best mechanism we have for discovering truth about the physical world, right? So, but it's not true that our knowledge of science is complete. It's also not true that even if it were complete, that it should direct everything that we do in our lives, right? So like the David Hume is off that fallacy, right? So
but I see 2 points. There is the question of the limits of science, but also the demarcation of science. What is it about, and what is it and what is it not about? But this was messed up, and how come that within medicine, people have become so you can say arrogant in a way that they think that they can prescribe measures like these, which has such a huge impact? How come?
I mean, in medicine, I went to medical school a long time ago, but I remember learning about the God complex.
Yeah.
Right. So if you're a surgeon, you have control over the life and death of the person that you're operating on. Right. So the idea that you are God, you have in your hands the life and death of this single individual on whom you are, on whom you're doing surgery. Essentially, science had a God complex during the pandemic. That the knowledge of science, and it wasn't even everybody, just a few scientists with a very particular expertise, right? So it's you exclude the expertise of social scientists, for instance. You exclude the expertise of anyone except for virologists and a few narrow epidemiologists who have some infectious disease experience, right? So that's it.
But even within that field, there were critical voices. So and I think that's exactly one of the virtues of science, that you accept that your knowledge is temporarily, that the doubt is essential to progress, etc. And when we were dealing with a new virus like that, how come that we don't limit ourselves within this field?
I mean, you hit it right on the head. So the key thing there is that it looked like science.
Yes.
When you had high authority in every country saying, this is what science is telling us to do. Shut our schools, don't go to church, shut our businesses, don't go visit your mother or father. All of that.
Leave them dying alone.
Leave them dying alone. Don't have funerals.
Yeah.
All of that took on the mantle of science, but was not actually science. So science, in truth, is a humble thing. Right? My knowledge is provisional. I have an idea. I'm going to test it against reality. If the reality says my idea is wrong, my idea is wrong, right? And so I try to go get a different idea. That's the humility is actually the source of strength of science. What you had instead was scientism, a sort of something that took on the form of science. It had scientific words in it. It had equations in it. It had graphs. It had things that looked like science, but were not actually science because it wasn't subject in the normal way to correction by physical reality.
Yeah. We see that some countries in the West deviate a little bit. For example, Sweden took its own path. At first, in the Netherlands, I think it only lasted for 1 week. We would go in a different direction, but then there was a huge media storm, I can say. And so our prime minister, I think, is not a very courageous prime minister. He's very managerial, and maybe you met him, but he made a turnaround, and we went along with I could say the communist opinion at the time. And of course, there has been a fierce critique also on the role of the WHO at the time. And the interesting thing is that I think a few years before the pandemic, also papers were published in which they evaluated the lockdowns and even were critical, very critical about this instrument. But during the pandemic, it was almost immediately one of the big measures that they propagated.
So let's talk about Sweden in just a bit, because I think they're extremely important for many, many reasons as the counterexample for the necessity of lockdown. And in fact, just before I move off from Sweden, just to let the fact is that Sweden had the lowest all-cause excess mortality than all of the rest of the world. All of Europe, all of the Americas, everywhere, the lowest. So as far as protecting human life, Sweden did the best.
Was the most successful.
And did not lock down during the time. Let's talk about WHO though. You're right that at the beginning of the pandemic, my understanding of pandemic management was that the optimal policy did not involve society-wide lockdowns. You could have local quarantines. The example that people had in their head was SARS-1 in 2003.
Yeah, but it was a horrible.
Well, SARS-1, it was spread by droplets. It didn't have aerosol spread.
No.
You couldn't just breathe, and you'd have to actually be close in physical presence. Someone would have to essentially have droplets sprayed on you. And so it didn't spread very far. local quarantines, identifying people who were sick and quarantining those people. That worked in 2003. I think in the head of the WHO and of the Chinese authorities who had handled SARS-1 in that way,
they had that model.
And when SARS-2 came, I actually think it started in October 2019, but that's a topic for a different time. When the Chinese authorities said, okay, well, this is similar to SARS-1, only except much bigger. So they did a province-wide lockdown of the Hubei province, including the large city of Wuhan, and in January 2020, and they proclaimed victory.
Yes.
The WHO sent a mission in February 2020 to the Hubei province to ask, well, what did the Chinese authorities do to be able to have a victory over this new disease? And the people that they sent came back from this essentially Potemkin village tour of China, convinced that the Chinese lockdown had worked.
Yeah.
And all it was necessary for the West to do was to copy the Chinese lockdown.
Yeah.
And the WHO signed on in that, in effect, saying, recommending society-wide, government-wide, all of government approaches for every country on earth.
Like I can imagine that you're imitating China in February, in March, but in the summer it had become clear that this wasn't the way out, and there was a huge damage. Especially among the younger and the vulnerable people. So how come that we just keep on going that way? We continued. I mean, the funny thing is, all people went along. I think that there was I used to talk about a network society in which politicians are also part of this network. And a network in which you can say there are also all kinds of governance institutions, non-governmental, governmental, but also the institutions you work at. So the institutional environment, they all went along. Most of the experts, also important in this network society, especially in a scientific society, the experts went along. Although most of them went along. Of course, capital and the industry, there were huge, I think, interests at stake. People could earn a lot in several fields, but there was also a huge damage done. So. But there was you could say the pharmaceutical industry played an important role in this whole making of the policy. So experts, governance, industry, and then the funny thing is, also the media went along. We experienced it, and you experienced it, and it was. And for me, that was the most frightening experience in a way that is like the closing of the mind that happened at the time. We know both Matthias Desmet, and he is talking about this mass formation. It's an old idea, in fact, but it has become very an actual phenomenon we're dealing with these days. But how do you look at this? Because you can say you were talking about a laptop.
Laptop class.
The laptop class, funny thing, but it's also what we call the elites, and I think I still find it very, very hard to understand why there was no possibility of breaking the narrative.
So I have two ideas that have gone through my head for the last 5 years about that, because I too recognized it at the time. In summer of 2020, it seemed very clear to me that the lockdowns had failed.
Yeah.
Right? The disease had spread despite the lockdowns in basically every country on earth that had tried them. China was reporting that a success, but nowhere else on earth was there such a success, right? The first analogy I will make is to the propaganda that happens in war. Like, look, it's like I've read about World War I and about the enthusiasm with which Europe embraced World War I.
Yeah.
People going to war, signing up. There was tremendous propaganda, essentially saying, valorizing this horrific war that destroyed European civilization, just tore it apart, right? And yet it couldn't stop. It was clear a year in, 6 months in, that it wasn't going to go anywhere. There was a stalemate that was never going to last. And
it was the suicidal war of Europe, I think. Yeah.
Yes, and it took essentially 4 terrible long years before people said, "Okay, enough." And even then, it was a tough thing. At some point, when you've done something so horrific, there's this sort of sunk cost fallacy, like that economy.
You can't give up anymore.
Well, you've poured so much into it. You've closed our schools. You've already harmed the children. You've already done damage to our social fabric. You've already prevented people from visiting loved ones in the hospital. You closed hospital down so that people can't go and get treatment for heart attacks and can't get screening for cancer. You've already done all this, and in just 2 short months, March to May, June, you're going to admit that it went wrong. It was all for nothing. Like, and if you think about it, there was a spirit in March of 2020. I didn't share the spirit, but I felt it around me. We're all in this for the common. This mass formation, if you can call it, a lot of you, or whatever you want to call it. But there was this like idea that we were sacrificing together in a common cause to defeat this common enemy, this virus that had just come out, and to ask the world in 2 short months to say, "Oh, we made a mistake. All this damage was for nothing." It's too much.
Yes. It's illuminating. It makes me think of. I wrote an article at the time in the spring of 2020, and it's called "The Path of Least Resistance." By the way, but in which I try to give us some kind of an explanation for what happened, and what I found very interesting in the way we talked about the disease, that we were fighting this war. We had a very martial spirit, like we are going to war against the virus. And I thought, well, it's crazy to talk about it that way. How can you defeat a virus? But that was the language we used. And politicians like Rutte was talking about the big hammer. We're gonna smash the virus like this. It was insane. But I think we imitated in a way China, like you said, that because they were talking about the war against the virus,
and they had won. Right?
They had won. They thought they had won. Yes. And it was a it was a Pyrrhus victory.
Yeah. Well, it absolutely was. The things that didn't just stop in the summer of 2020. It was I think sometime in like early 2021 that I first started seeing very explicitly this zero COVID goal in the West. Right? There were like prominent scientists talking about zero COVID. They'd just been through a full year.
Yeah.
And of course the vaccine had come out, but it was very clear that the vaccine first, it was going to take a long time to vaccinate the entire world. So that wasn't so that meant that it was going to be locked down essentially for what, another year or two. And then second, it became very clear very early on that the vaccine wouldn't stop you from getting or spreading COVID.
No, exactly.
So but yet zero COVID persisted. You can't let go of, we'd sacrificed so much.
Exactly. This is I think that's a good explanation. And as soon as you're talking about war, then you can justify all kind of measures like it's an exceptional state you're in.
Right.
It's the martial law,
right.
Because you're in a.
You can violate human rights. You can censor people. You can destroy the livelihoods of almost anybody to achieve victory.
Yes. So now we're in 2025. And I want to talk about the current revolution in the United States. And we're gonna, with this experience of the COVID and the crazy lockdowns and everything, and the expectations, the way the politicians dealt with it, and make you feel ashamed when you were not behaving in the way that they wanted, etc. And also this huge polarization within society, because there was a minority who was very critical about all those measures. Not only the people that were not using laptops for their work, but also some intellectuals, some politicians, but there were a minority. But then this turnaround came, I think, in with the election of Trump. There's something going on now in the United States. Of course, the appointment of Robert F. Kennedy is I think it's a revolution in a way. We don't hear as much from him as maybe from other and especially as we hear from Trump himself. But and your appointment is a part of this, you can say, this new climate concerning the medicine, and because especially in the United States there are really serious problems and with the health of the people. So I was talking about this interrelatedness of different fields, and now you're in one of those governance institutions. What is the task you have formulated for yourself, and what is Robert Kennedy trying to do in these 4 years? I think I might hope that he's there for 8 years, but I think 4 years is not enough. But
well, I mean, I think the tagline for the movement, "Make America Healthy Again," that's the goal.
Yeah.
And America needs it, right? So even compared to Europe, America is tremendously unhealthy, right? So unlike Europe, the United States has had no increase in life expectancy since 2012. It's been flat. The chronic disease crisis, although it's not great in Europe, is much, much worse in the United States. Vast numbers of people.
Yeah, but it's growing also over here.
It is, but it's still.
I know. I can see the difference when I walk on the street.
Yeah, obesity, diabetes, heart attacks, just huge numbers of you see the evidence of chronic disease everywhere you look. You had that before the pandemic.
Yeah,
you had this sort of state of chronic disease that has left us in a place where our children are likely to live less healthy lives than we will.
Yeah,
and then then the pandemic hit, and the United States had one of the worst outcomes in the world as far as excess mortality. It took until from 2019 until 2024. The U.S. life expectancy was below, from 2020 to 2024, U.S. life expectancy was below 2019 levels.
Yeah.
Sweden recovered by 2021.
Yeah. But the underlying condition of the people was completely different.
Right. So the best way, it turns out, for pandemic preparedness, the best thing you can do is to have a healthy, metabolically healthy population.
But it's so obvious. It's so obvious.
So that's the goal of Bobby Kennedy, of President Trump, is to make America healthy again. The idea is, and now, as director of the NIH, it is kind of a revolution. I mean, I was censored. I was actually subject.
Yes, exactly, because
I was subject to a devastating thing.
We didn't talk about that, but I think that's very important just to mention once more. Within the institutions, you were one of the critical voices as an expert on the field.
But I was shunned aside.
Yes, politicians didn't want to know about the Great Barrington Declaration. The media didn't want to,
and other scientists, right?
And other scientists,
especially the people like Francis Collins. I've forgiven him personally, but in October 2020, he wrote an email to Tony Fauci calling for a devastating takedown of me, Martin, Kulldorff, and Sinatra.
But it was not only a war against the virus; it was also a war against deviating opinions. Critical opinions.
If you have a spirit of like we're all in this together, and you had a few heretics saying no, this isn't a mistake, those heretics need to be expelled, right? So that I'm appointed to be the NIH director is in that sense really is a revolution. My goal as NIH director, of course, is the broad thing is to make America healthy again. But the idea for me, my specific task is to make science work the way it's supposed to actually help us make America healthy again. The key thing for me is we have to make investments in science that address the key problems, the key health problems the United States has, we shouldn't be making like broader, like there was a lot of like investments in like trying essentially social justice issues that the institutes of health are not particularly well adapted to doing, and it actually doesn't actually translate into better health for anybody. And so focus on actual health issues, and then help repair science. Right, there's some real, maybe we'll have time to talk about it at some point, but like even before the pandemic, it was clear that science is facing a replicability crisis. Where and the problem is one that's just related to your book that you were telling about earlier that you wrote. Right? It's problem of
authority. Yeah,
authority in science has become: do you publish papers in a top journal? You don't have to look at the science itself. You just have to know that it's published in a top journal.
Yeah.
Are you a fancy professor in a top university?
Yeah.
Then if you stay within the groupthink of all of the top professors, whatever you say is true.
Yeah, dus the conformational bias, to conform to the communist opinion.
A symptom of how problematic this is is the replication crisis in science. Yeah. Huge numbers of published papers published in top peer-reviewed.
Yeah, your colleague Ioannidis published this famous article.
Exactly.
Why most scientific findings are false.
Yes. It's because we have inverted authority. The true source of authority in science comes from replication. When independent teams of people look at the same answer, nature determines the truth of science, scientific propositions. Instead, now it's not nature; it's high authority. Do you publish in top journals? Does the peer review say yes? That's it. Then it's the truth. Rather than other people looking at the same thing independently find the same thing.
Yes, and then the question becomes, of course, what makes it possible that you publish in those journals? Who is funding those journals? Who is in these networks? So we were talking about this network organization in which science takes part, and of course there's a huge role. I already mentioned it for example, the pharmaceutical industry.
Yeah, well, money definitely plays an
money plays an enormous role, both in funding the universities, but also in grants, and even to make it possible to publish certain scientific findings.
But in principle, the NIH can be used to address that, right? The NIH is public money. It's not pharmaceutical company money. The goal isn't to make profit. The goal is to actually have big advances in science that translate over.
But I would say this is exactly one of the tasks of a government, just to hold on to the truth, to protect the truth against the perversion that power and money can have over the truth.
I mean, in principle, of course.
In principle, but now we see that this. And you can say those institutions also, the government institutions, have become corrupted in a way by this whole network.
I think it's as far as like the power of government, I've always had two minds. Like I do share the idealism that you have, right? In principle, it's supposed to, but whenever you have this great concentration of power, and especially in a sort of a democratic kind of system, people are going to want to shift it in their direction, right? And so, and especially if you're powerful, you will work to try to shift the workings of government toward the place where you want it to go. I mean, I think the job of officials in the government, such as me, is to resist that and have a sort of a true north, where say, look, whatever the results are. Sometimes the truth results in favor of some pharmaceutical company. Sometimes it doesn't, right? So, of course, but the North Star is the truth, right? So this is why, like for me, trying to solve this replication crisis is one of the major tasks I've taken on for myself as the director of the NIH.
And how do you look at the other institutions involved? For example, media, or what is happening in the supranational or international institutions like the WHO. I mean, Trump was very critical on their role, but they have a systemic, very important role to play, I think, or at least there must be some cooperation worldwide, and some institution who can be trusted.
I think for both the media and the WHO, the problem is exactly this, very, very similar. They both failed in fundamental ways during the pandemic. The big media, there's obviously like folks in the media that you're since that did fine. And the WHO also failed at its primary task, which is to improve the health of the world.
But it was not simply bad luck. I mean, it became clear that there was something wrong with these institutions, I would say.
That's the problem they both face right there.
Yeah.
In order to regain the trust of the people, they have to earn it. I mean, famously, Trump withdrew from the WHO almost immediately upon becoming elected. The WHO, if it's going to be what it's supposed to be, it really needs to have an honest assessment of its failures during the pandemic. And I'm not seeing any of that. That just hasn't.
And what does that mean? What does that mean in the long run? For this institutional,
I just say like as a theoretical thing, like just I'll tell you what happens in medical school. I learned this. Suppose that there's doctors that are managing a patient in a hospital, and the patient there's some mistake made, and the patient dies. There's a conference that's conducted afterwards of all the doctors and nurses and other healthcare professionals involved, called a morbidity and mortality conference, where there's an honest, open, free discussion about what
exactly.
Now, the goal isn't necessarily to necessarily blame a single individual. I mean, we've been talking about this as a collective failure. Right? To blame a single individual is not the right. It's a collective failure, but if you do not acknowledge that collective failure and even some individual responsibility for some of that failure, then you can't reform, you can't learn. The reason why these morbidity and mortality conferences happen is to reform, is to have better ideas so that the next patient doesn't face the same problem. The WHO, the supranational national organizations, even like national, parties, the mass media, they all were part of that collective failure. And unless there's an honest assessment, look, we made this mistake, and even more important than that, here's what we're doing to protect against it ever happening again.
Yes.
It's really hard to trust them again.
Yeah. To quote the famous words of Shakespeare, there's something rotten in the state of Denmark, but there's something rotten also in this institutional environment. And I think one of the big tasks you're put on your shoulders, I can say, is to make those institutions healthy again.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the task of the WHO is incredibly important, right? You need a supranational organization that coordinates health responses that are international in nature, right? It's a
one way or the other, one way,
right?
Yeah.
Is the WHO the right organizations for it, or some other international organization that comes up and that replaces it, or I mean, I mean, I'm actually indifferent. It's probably easier if the WHO were to reform. I know that there's now some other new efforts to try to build up alternatives. I think the very need means that we will have such an organization. The demand for it is so great. The question is trust. That organization needs the trust of everybody involved in order to succeed.
In the 60s, they were talking about this long march through the institutions. Is there a long march through the institutions necessary at the moment? To begin with the United States itself, is this what is? Because we're dealing with the culture of an organization.
I mean, it's kind of what you're seeing now with the way that the Trump administration, we're dealing with universities, right? So that we're actually, what we're doing is we're calling the universities to come back to what they're supposed to be, what their mission may tell, essentially small L liberal institutions where there's a there's pluralism is accepted at the heart. There's a real, an honest desire for the truth, that the most important sort of problems of our society are addressed, but not from a partisan point of view or from a very narrow, radical point of view, but a scholarly, informed, deeply knowledgeable point of view, right? That promote inclusion of of ideas in society rather than exclusion of people with heresies. I mean, it's been interesting to watch from the inside, and especially since I was in the university for such a long time. This sort of policy, it's what it feels like to me is a calling to the universities to come back to what their missions meant them to be, rather than what they became. It's so evidently clear during the pandemic as places of enforcing groupthink. Instead of the place of a deep and sort of humble search for knowledge.
Yeah, at the same time, we can see right now that the universities, also in Europe, especially in Europe, I must say, are seeing Trump as the great adversary, and like they are even getting stronger in their own opinions about we are protecting humanity, we are protecting the moral ground of our institution.
I mean, almost every single person of prominence in university settings in the United States and in Europe, that actually even out in South America, in Asia, that I've spoken with, that had a contrary opinion to the groupthink of the pandemic management, lockdowns, faced persecution within the university.
Yes, of course, we heard a lot about that. We had people, so
like the question is, are universities really truly places where people can have an honest exploration of ideas, even if it isn't within the group or are they not? I mean, the evidence from the pandemic is that they have become places that are very difficult to have any thoughts that are not consonant with the groupthink.
Yes, but when you see what's going on right now, are you very optimistic about what?
In the United States, I'm fairly optimistic.
Yes, in the United States,
I'm fairly optimistic. I mean, I think it's a painful transition. Just now, I can just say honestly, like I've lots of my friends have told me how difficult it is to see their grants have to change course. It's part of the, but if the priorities are to bring us back to real science, honest science, not aiming at achieving impossible goals of social justice that we're not capable of, but rather just honest science, honest study of the humanities, honest philosophy, where there's lots and lots of pluralistic ideas accepted and tolerated, in fact, encouraged. I mean, that's a much better future for our university. That's the future I see right now for the American universities. Just it's a matter of birth pangs right now.
Okay. And how do you look at Europe at the moment? Because I can see the polarization between the United States and the Trump government and on the polarization on the one hand, but at the same time also vassalization, like they're becoming vassals. This is a very strange phenomenon.
It is. I mean, I don't think vassalization will happen. I mean, you saw Rutte is saying let's have the 5% of Defense Department defense spending. I mean, I think there's this sense of both a deep connection with the United States that it's lasted now ever since the end of the Second World War. That I think is permanent. I mean, I don't think that will ever change. At the same time, there's this sense of like, well, almost like financially, the kind of money where the money goes, that there ought to be some level of independence. I mean, and I think Europe is still struggling to find what that looks like. I mean, I think that of course Europe is facing, just like the United States, is a massive immigration crisis. But just like as in the United States, in country after country in Europe, you see non-traditional parties that want to address the immigration problem.
The populist parties, in fact.
In ascendance, and you see this counter revolution, if you will, of the traditional parties trying to suppress. Like probably the best example is the UK. Maybe the Netherlands also might be a good example, right? So, but you see, Germany, of course. I mean, again, in country after country after country, you're seeing this in Europe. Europe feels to me like it is going through the same exact sort of direction of pressure that the United States has gone through. It just hasn't had its Trump yet.
Okay, exactly. And that means is what is happening in the United States right now. also on an institutional level regarding science and regarding medicine, is you think that the same is going to happen in a way in Europe?
Yeah,
it might take some time.
I think there's only two. Like, so okay, let's talk about China and the West.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, let's go back a few years. We're talking about the World War II. At the end of World War II, the Soviet bloc was allied with the West, right? They were allies with us.
No, definitely.
Right.
Yeah.
And then by 1948, the Cold War had been launched. I think the fault of the Soviet Union.
Yeah.
And but the Soviet Union did is was essentially it cut into the scientific world, right? There was Soviet science and the Western science.
Yeah, there was a communist truth and a liberal truth.
And the key thing is that neither side could talk to each other. We had two scientific worlds, right? You had terrible things like Lysenko and his denial of basic genetics, Mendelian genetics, but you also had like brilliant mathematicians in the Soviet bloc.
In space, we could work together.
Well, we didn't really work together. They had their mathematicians, and we would. I mean, so, but you had a scientific world that were riven in two. Right now, we have one scientific world, and I don't see any like daylight in the scientific world between the Europe and the United States, right? That I think it's going to be one scientific world, and the direction the United States is taking, I think, because it's rooted in real science, the idea of replication being the core thing, not authority, whatever the results are, it's going to be too attractive for Western scientists to say we want something else, right? On the other hand, I don't know what will happen with China. Right? It looks like it could be I hope not, but it could be, what if it's what if there's a second Cold War? And China has a huge investment they've made in biomedicine. They are the second leading country in the world in biomedicine, I think. They'd probably say the leading country in the world in biomedicine. Will we have a scientific world riven in two like we did during the Cold War? I mean, I think we should try our very hardest to avoid that, but that's a real possibility.
At least you're trying to make the American scientific world healthy again, and all the actors that are involved in this process. What are for you the spiritual and moral sources of this fight?
I mean, I can't look back at these last 5 years and not see. I mean, I'm a Christian, as you know, Adrian. So and I can't see anything other than God at work. I just think He's laughing at me. Like I was a professor and was very happy as a professor for 20 years. I thought I'd spend the rest of my life at Stanford. I never, in my wildest imagination, ever desired or wanted a job in government, especially in a top position. It was never my ambition. And so I've been thinking about what I would say to a student who asked me, well, Jay, how do I prepare to become the director of the NIH? What investments might I make out?
No idea.
I have no idea what to tell that person, what to tell that student. I think I think that there's a path that I have to. Obviously, it's not something I chose, but it's there. That I've been called to follow. And that there's a lot of consolation in that. As hard as ours has been to like move from California. So I've had to have, my family is still in California because my youngest son is about to go off to college. So my wife was out there. So I've been alone essentially in Washington, D.C. It's been kind of painful, actually.
Yeah, that's your sacrifice for the good cause.
But what else can I do? I have called down this path that I didn't choose myself, but I have to keep going down it, because I think for me, if I can make a small difference in the health of science, it can make a big difference in the way the world is.
Well, I thank you for that. I'm very grateful for you took the job, and I hope you succeed. And I thank you for this very inspiring conversation, Jay.
Thank you. It's so nice to meet you.
Yeah.